Hello, and welcome to Dining with Death, True Crime Tuesday. Before we begin, please hit the like button if you like the video, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more from me, and if you want to support the community, you can join my Patreon. We have a big goal there, and I will talk about that at the end of the video. I thought a little while before covering this case, because lately, here in America at least, we've been experiencing a very disturbing phenomenon. In the last few years, there are people in this country that have decided they don't want to talk about history. They don't want to talk about facts, and they do not want to talk about expertise. Whenever I broach this subject, a few viewers whine about politics. I hate politics, and I am not a political person. I laugh when people call me a liberal because I believe in equal rights for everyone. How does following the Constitution make me a liberal? I laugh when people say I'm too far right because I believe in the right to bear arms, and they find out I own guns and I hunt. But lately I've been laughing because the people who spent years talking about how political correctness has gone too far and they can't say what they want to say anymore, now want to ban books and critical race theory, which some of us just call history. It's hysterical to me. Both far sides are wing of the same bird, and I don't associate myself with either. But there is one thing I will not do, and that's ignore crimes against marginalized communities simply because there are some people who want to pretend that is somehow political. I got nasty comments when I said I would be featuring more missing and murdered Indigenous women. And whenever I go back at someone who has nasty things to say about our queer brothers and sisters, I'm accused of caring more about them than others. I can't win, and I ain't here to try. I'm here to bring you the stories with straight facts and a lot of shitty sarcasm mixed with some old lady opinions. That's what I do here, and that's what I'll always do here. If you like it, great, stay. If you don't, there's other stuff out there for you. So today I am bringing you another story of the marginalized. I find these stories fascinating, not because I'm trying to shove them in your faces, but because these types of stories tell us about us. The way our society treats the marginalized, the way the police treat the marginalized, is only a reflection of you and of I. And I truly believe that we have a lot to learn from these kinds of stories that have nothing to do with politics, only our humanity and our values as a people. This is definitely one of those stories. When gay men started disappearing from the Toronto Village District, the reaction from the police opened up old wounds and brought up issues still festering under the surface. Because you see, back in the 1970s, a similar thing happened, and when it did, it revealed some very ugly truths about our society. This is the story of the Toronto Village serial killer. I'm your host, Stacy Lee. Let's get into it. (1981). It's important to start this story decades ago because what happened in the 1970s and early 1980s in Toronto carried over for decades and affected the way this case was handled between 2010 and 2017. In the 1970s, there was no official gay district in Toronto, but there were bars and clubs that were known to be hangouts and safe havens for queer people. Drag queens openly walked the streets, and couples entered and left these clubs that sat next to clubs that were not for queer people. And as we have seen so many times throughout history, when a marginalized group of people starts to live their lives more openly, there is a portion of the population that somehow sees their freedom as a threat to their own freedom. Freedom is not pie. Equality is not cake. It doesn't disappear when more people get it. There is an infinite supply to go around. Freedom for others does not mean less freedom for me or anyone else. But as the gay community started to move about more freely, the straight people who spent time in the bars and clubs of that same area began to push back. I found an interview with this priest that works with the community and remembers the time well. He said there began to be groups of people who would stand outside the gay clubs and bars and throw eggs at people coming and going. The eggs then turned into rocks, and then the beatings began. Gay men were openly bashed and violently beaten on a nightly basis, and the police did absolutely nothing. This priest tells of how even when he went on behalf of the church to plead with the police, hoping that his stance on humanity and Christ-like love for all would motivate them to action, it did not. Soon gay men were hiding their identities and living in fear that they would be outed, fear that they would lose their jobs, fear that they would lose their lives. And those fears came true. Gay men began being murdered in downtown Toronto, and as happens quite frequently, the victims became those at fault in the minds of many. If the gay people just didn't exist, there wouldn't be a need to murder them, right? If people would just act and look and dress and behave exactly all the same, there would be no need to kill the ones who dare to step out of line, right? Instead of the police initiating a search for the killer or killers of these gay men, they decided the gay men were the problem, and in 1981 they conducted a massive raid of all the area bathhouses. The raid was called Operation Soap. Hundreds of police officers were enlisted to attack all the area clubs and bathhouses at once. Many of them entered in plain clothes. They brought with them bats and hammers and began smashing their way through the doors of every establishment in downtown Toronto where queer people hung out. Gay men were dragged into the streets, some of them naked, standing in the Canadian February air with not so much as a blanket, barefoot and freezing, humiliated and shivering. Police battered down doors and placed everyone inside in handcuffs to intentionally humiliate the patrons. Days after the raid, the public became enraged, and it wasn't just the queer community that was angry. Allies joined forces with the LGBTQ+ and took to the streets. There were protests and parades, and there was some violence. The police response was to arrest anyone they could get their hands on, and this just made the tensions worse. The queer community did not give up. Day after day, people took to the streets carrying signs and banners, letting the police and the public know they were not going anywhere, and they didn't care if they had to be arrested to make their point. The entire incident, known as the Toronto Bathhouse Raids, was an ugly event that left a stain on the city of Toronto, and it left a legacy of bad blood between the police and the queer community. A legacy that would last and carry through when it started happening again. Halloween, October 31st, 2001. Actor and model Mark Henderson is attacked in his apartment by a man he took home with him to see his Halloween costume. There are also rumors that Mark was a sex worker and would take men back to his apartment from time to time. The attacker struck Mark in the back of the head with an iron pipe, but Mark fought back. He lost consciousness and awoke a while after he was attacked. He called 911 and made a report from his hospital bed. The attacker came forward and turned himself in. Who was he? This man, Bruce McArthur. Bruce claimed he didn't remember perpetrating the attack, and he didn't know why he did it. He pled guilty to assault with a weapon and causing bodily harm, and he was given a conditional sentence of 729 days. But because Bruce had a medical condition, seizures, he avoided jail time. Police had no way of knowing that this pleasant-looking 50-year-old man was a serial killer, and he might be one of the most prolific in history, with his crimes dating back all the way to the 1970s when he was in his 20s. Who is Bruce McArthur? He was born in 1951 in Lindsay, Ontario, and he was raised on a farm. His parents took in foster children as a means of income, but they had a very good reputation for treating the children well. Bruce did not fit in school. He was known as a brown-noser, do they still use that term? A suck-up, and he liked to be the teacher's pet. Bruce knew he was gay early in his life, but he didn't want to accept it. In 1970, he began dating Janice Campbell, and later on, they were married in their early 20s. Bruce went to work for Eaton's department store as a buyer. The store was located in downtown Toronto, a few blocks from the gay village on Yonge Street, between College and Wellesley. Bruce's father developed a brain tumor, and he was sent to a nursing home. During this time, Bruce's mother began to date, and this made Bruce very angry. He pulled away from his mother and became closer to his father, visiting him often. In the 1990s, Bruce came out to his wife, telling her that he was gay, but they continued to live together. The couple began having financial problems when their teenage son kept getting into trouble, and his legal bills piled up. In 1999, they had to declare bankruptcy. Bruce and his wife had separated in 1997, and during that time, Bruce began frequenting the gay clubs of Church and Wellesley, and he moved into his own apartment. It was a few years later when he committed the assault on Halloween. Bruce McArthur was mingling among the regular folks of Toronto, and he might have appeared to be one of the city's usual citizens, but he was not. Bruce McArthur is a serial killer. In 2002, Bruce began using Recon, a gay fetish website for men into BDSM. He was active on several dating websites, and he was a regular at area gay bars. Bruce lived on the 19th floor of this apartment building called Leaside Towers. Before long, Bruce was banned from Church and Wellesley area bars because it became known that he picked up men and hurt them during rough sex. The queer community looks out for its own, and if you get a reputation as someone who hurts other people, you will be blacklisted. Bruce seemed to spiral after his divorce, and this blacklisting did not help. He was prescribed antidepressants and began working as a landscaper, and seemed to be an unhappy person to those around him. Now, I'm going to be butchering the names in this next section because Toronto has a large Middle Eastern population, so please forgive me on my pronunciation. In 1999, Bruce met Skandaraj Navaratnam, and the two began a relationship. Skandaraj was called Skanda for short. Skanda is described as the life of the party, someone everyone loved. Bruce and Skanda's relationship continued kind of off and on. They would often break up and not see each other for some time and then get back together. And then Skanda went missing over Labor Day weekend in 2010. He was last seen leaving Zippers nightclub with an unknown man. On December 29, 2010, Abdul Basir Faizi called his wife to tell her that he was at work with some colleagues and he would be home late. Abdul Basir was actually in the gay village. He was a wonderful father to his children and was known to be a hardworking and kind man. He never went home that night, and he was reported missing the next day, and then a week later, his car was found. Abdul Basir's wife stated that police believed he had abandoned his family and did not want to be found. That's not what she believed. Then on October 18, 2012, Majid Kahan, who was known to associate with Bruce McArthur, disappeared. Majid was last seen in the area of Alexander and Yonge and was reported missing about a week later by his adult son. On August 15, 2015, Sarush Mahmoodi was last seen alive near his apartment building on Markham Road in Scarborough. He was reported missing by his son-in-law later on. In January of 2016, Kirushna Kanaragatnam, new to Canada seeking a better life, vanished after immigrating from Sri Lanka. A few months later, in April of 2016, Dean Lisowick disappeared. Dean was a very kind man who often helped out sex workers in the area who were homeless and hungry, and Dean himself experienced homelessness from time to time. Salim Esen went missing over Easter weekend 2017. He had moved to Canada from Turkey to marry his boyfriend. He was last seen alive near Bloor Street East. On June 26, 2017, Andrew Kinsman disappeared after attending a Pride festival. Surveillance cameras later showed him getting into Bruce McArthur's van outside of his apartment building. The two men were known to be in some type of a relationship, and this is the death that really sealed Bruce McArthur's fate. 8 men had now been killed that authorities knew of. Again, there were accusations that the police were not doing enough to stop this predator because the victims were gay. People in and out of the queer community agreed the police were not working these disappearances as thoroughly as they did, and tensions began to rise, with accusations of prejudice and bigotry in the department coming out again, decades after the bathhouse raids. Now, it's worth mentioning Bruce McArthur was 67 years old when the last murder was committed. Forensic psychiatrists that have studied this case are really interested in Bruce because it is so rare for a serial killer to still be operating this late in life. Serial killing is a younger man's game. I mean, poor choice of words, but you know what I mean. Bruce is very, very rare in the world of serial killers. They simply do not usually continue to kill this late in life. But he did. In November of 2012, a task force called Project Houston was formed to investigate the disappearance of Skanda. Police believed he had been murdered, but they had no body and they had no leads. They worked for years on this disappearance. Then in 2018, a man posted on a cannibal website, those are just a thing, claiming he had killed and eaten a man in Toronto. But later it was found that this man was just making up wild stories. Back in 2013, Project Houston had linked the disappearances of Abdul Bazir and Majid, but in 2016, there were still no leads on any of these 8 missing men that they believed were linked. Something else happened in 2016. Bruce McArthur was arrested after a man came forward claiming that Bruce had assaulted him during an encounter in a vehicle. Bruce was brought in for police interrogation, and I have a copy of that interview for you to see.
Okay, sir. So just before we begin here, I just want to let you know that we are being audio and video recorded right now because there's a camera just up in the corner, okay. And this device up here is a microphone, so it's picking up everything that we say, okay?
Okay.
Okay, sir, and your name is?
Bruce McArthur.
And if you could spell it for me, please?
B-R-U-C-E, and MacArthur, M, small c, capital A-R-T-H-U-R.
Okay, sir. And right now, you're under arrest. You were placed under arrest this evening for the offense of assault, okay? You've been brought here to 232 Division for the purposes of being investigated for that offense, okay? Right. So an allegation has been made against you, and this officer in just a moment is going to let you know exactly what that allegation is, okay? What I'm going to do to you right now is just read you a caution and let you know that you're being investigated for the offense of assault, okay, this evening.
Well, we talked about going for dinner, and he said he needed to take a shower, so I said I'd meet him at the Tim Hortons at Finch and Bathurst. And so he arrived, and we were going to have sex, and he suggested do it in the back of his truck since it hadn't been used yet. It was a brand new truck. I said, well, there's more room in the back of my van. So we went to my van. And we started kissing. So then I thought, okay, he likes it rough. So I put my hand to his throat, and just for a few seconds, because before that he's very strong, he just completely turned around and grabbed me by the throat. He said, now I'm going to show you what I'm going to do to you. And he had me by the throat to the point that I couldn't breathe. So I put my hands like up in the air, like I surrender, because I couldn't talk. And that's when he finally let go. And then he jumped out of the car. He said, I don't want to see you again. So I sat there because I was kind of out of breath. And I thought he was getting in his car to leave, because he started the car and it was running. I could hear it running because he was parked right beside me. And the next thing I heard him say, it's 911 or whatever.
Bruce McArthur was later released without charge, and the police officer who made that call would later stand trial after being accused of insubordination and neglect of duty, but he was found not guilty. Bruce McArthur had been in their custody, but after his release, he was free to kill again. He went on to murder Salim and Andrew even after this arrest. Bruce didn't seem to be too spooked by the fact that he was on police radar. In fact, there are those that believe his 2 arrests, the first with the iron pipe and the second for the attempted strangling, only emboldened Bruce, making him feel that he was never going to be caught. I even found one comment thread where Bruce supposedly told someone he was in jail with that the police didn't care about gay men and they didn't care who killed them. The police then formed a second task force to look into all 8 missing men, and that task force was called Project Prism. Detective Sergeant Michael Richmond was assigned to oversee it. He had been on Project Houston for 6 months, and he knew these cases well. Because all of the victims had used dating apps and some lived a secretive lifestyle, the investigation was very difficult. These men were meeting up with people they didn't know, and so for police, the killer could be just about anyone. The big break came when police got surveillance video of Andrew Kinsman getting into a red vehicle, a red Dodge Caravan to be exact. Police then went into Andrew Kinsman's home, and he had a calendar hanging in his kitchen. On the date that he vanished, he had written the name Bruce. So the police rounded up all owners of red Dodge Caravans whose name was also Bruce. And there were 5 of those particular cars registered to men named Bruce, but only one of them was the exact year, model of car they were looking for, a 2004, and it was registered to Bruce McArthur. The police then gathered surveillance video from Bruce's apartment building. They were surprised to learn that the red Dodge Caravan had disappeared from the residence. So police then set out to get warrants for Bruce's computers, his wireless phone, his home phone, and his bank records. Most of those were granted, and by mid-2018, cops were sifting through Bruce McArthur's life with a fine-tooth comb. On September 8th, 2018, Bruce McArthur was officially named a suspect in the Toronto Village serial killings, but the public was not informed. On October 3rd, police paid a visit to a man named Dominic Vatier after they found out that he was the person that purchased the 2004 Dodge Caravan from Bruce McArthur. Dominic owned a shop called Dom's Auto Parts in Courtice, Ontario, about 43 miles northeast of Toronto. The police took the vehicle into custody and CSI units began to go through it. Not long after the vehicle was turned over to forensics, blood was found in the vehicle and it was sent out for testing. It turned out to be Andrew Kinsman's blood. Then police found out that Bruce McArthur had been hired to tend a yard at a home in Mallory Crescent neighborhood. He had an arrangement with the people who lived at that house. Bruce would do their landscaping and yard maintenance in exchange for using the owner's garage to store his landscaping equipment. Remember, Bruce lived in this high-rise apartment building that wouldn't have any kind of storage space for tools like that, so he needed to store his tools somewhere else. Once the police found out that Bruce was spending a lot of time at this particular house, they requested a warrant for the property and it was granted. They took cadaver dogs to the residence, but the dogs did not indicate any human remains. Police then installed a camera inside the garage to monitor Bruce's activities. And they also cloned Bruce's key fob to his apartment so they could track his comings and goings and also get a record of his activities during the time Andrew Kinsman went missing. When the blood evidence from the van came back, investigators were informed that 2 different men's blood had been found inside. Like I said, Andrew Kinsman's blood was in the van, but so was Salim Essen's. This was enough for police to get a general warrant for Bruce's apartment, and they entered his residence and cloned his computer hard drive while he was out. As the computer forensics team went through the hard drive, the police issued a warning to Toronto's gay community. Stop using the gay dating apps for the time being. On December 8, 2017, the police held a news conference. They told the public that Project Prism investigators had interviewed 62 witnesses and obtained 28 warrants in the case. By January of 2018, the review of Bruce's hard drive was complete, and the findings directly linked Bruce to the disappearances of Salim and Andrew. Now, here is a very gruesome detail of the case. Bruce had taken photos of the dead bodies of his victims, and even though he had tried to delete them, forensic analysts managed to recover the gruesome images. The cops had him. The police put Bruce under round-the-clock surveillance while waiting for warrants. Officers were instructed to watch every move he made and told they were only to arrest Bruce if he was observed alone with another man. It's lucky they were watching because they were forced to step in. January 18th, 2018. Police officers sitting outside this apartment building where Bruce had lived on the 19th floor for some time watched as a young man entered the building. The officers radioed in and were told they could make the arrest if they feared this man's life was in danger. There were officers stationed to watch the door at Bruce's apartment on the 19th floor, and as this young man entered, they gave the signal. Police were given the go-ahead and they broke down the door to Bruce's home. There, they found the young man tied to the bed but uninjured. The man told the officers he met Bruce through the dating app Growler and that he'd had sex with Bruce several times. At the time the police broke in, the young man was handcuffed to Bruce's steel bed frame with a black bag over his head, and Bruce had also tried to tape his mouth shut. Can you imagine being this man? The cops break the door down. You're like that, on the bed, and you think you're involved, in some BDSM or whatever, and then you find out that you have been tied up by a serial killer. I honestly do not know how people just go out and meet strangers like this. I am such a homebody and such a introvert and a hermit. It's wild to me. But at least with the apps, there is some tracking. They're still not super safe. Police seized all Bruce's electronic devices, which included 5 cell phones, 5 computers, 3 digital cameras, and a dozen USB flash drives. Bruce was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder in the presumed deaths of Andrew and Salim, but they still did not have a single body.
This morning at approximately 10:25 a.m., police arrested 66-year-old Bruce McArthur of the City of Toronto. He is self-employed as a landscaper using the company name Artistic Design, and he lives in the Thorncliffe Park area. He has been charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder in relation to Mr. Kinsman and Mr. Essen. We believe he is responsible for the deaths of Mr. Essen and Mr. Kinsman, and we believe he is responsible for the deaths of other men who have yet to be identified. In other words, we believe there are other victims. As of right now, interviews are taking place, and police have secured 5 properties, 4 in Toronto and 1 in Madoc, connected to Bruce McArthur in an effort to further investigate these occurrences.
On the day Bruce was arrested, police executed search warrants at 5 separate properties where Bruce had done landscaping work. This was the dead of winter in Canada, so digging was no easy task. The owners of the Leaside home were barred from their residence, and the cadaver dogs were brought in. The dogs alerted near 2 large planters that were frozen to the ground. The police had to bring in heaters to melt the ice around the base of the planters, which were then wrapped in plastic and taken to the forensics laboratory. On January 29th, police announced they had found the dismembered skeletal remains of at least 3 people in 2 of the large planter boxes seized at the Leaside residence. The police then added 3 counts of murder to Bruce's charges for the deaths of Majid, Sarouche, and Dean. On February 8th, police announced they found 3 more sets of remains in planters from that same Leaside residence, and that one of those sets of remains belonged to Andrew Kinsman. He was identified by his fingerprints. More human remains were later found in February, those of Skanda, who was identified by dental records. In March, they discovered a 7th set of remains. In April of 2018, Bruce McArthur was charged with the murders of 7 men, and an 8th charge was added for the murder of Karushna in April of that year. He was put into segregation under suicide watch, and his trial was scheduled to begin on June 20th, 2018. Negotiations began, and on January 28th, 2019, Bruce McArthur pled guilty to 8 counts of murder, ending the need for a trial. Bruce's attorney read a statement divulging the details of the killings, which took place between 2010 and 2017. Each of the murders were admitted to be premeditated and sexual in nature. Bruce kept trophies that belonged to his victims, including jewelry and notebooks. When it was all said and done, 4 of the victims' DNA was found in Bruce's red Dodge Caravan. He had taken hundreds of post-mortem photographs of his victims. He had staged the bodies to look as if they had ropes around their necks. Some of the bodies were posed nude, wearing fur coats and hats. And some of the bodies Bruce had shaved after they were dead. He then kept all of the hair that was found in Ziploc bags at a shed he used for storage. Isn't it just incredible how many of these guys there are out there killing people and posing them and taking photos and keeping parts of them? It's just something I don't think I'll ever get used to hearing. This sick and depraved killer had been living among the masses, moving freely every day for decades. In February of 2019, Bruce McArthur was sentenced to life imprisonment with no parole for 25 years. This is Canada, my friends. If he was here in the States, he'd most likely get death. The prosecutor argued for 50 years, stating that Bruce had shown no remorse of any kind, but it is highly unlikely he will ever be granted parole. Bruce is quite overweight and suffers from type 2 diabetes. He is currently 71 years old and is not expected to live another 25 years. But the question here is it possible that Bruce McArthur is responsible for the rash of killings in the late 1970s? He would have been in his 20s then, and there are police that are firmly convinced he is responsible. As of right now, there are police officers dedicated to going through every detail of Bruce McArthur's past, trying everything in their power to find out whether or not Bruce has 8 victims or many more, and we will just have to wait and see what they discover. I think the police worked really hard to redeem themselves on this one. I think most of them saw the errors of the 1970s and wanted to right the ship. The bottom line, my friends, is if we do not stand up for the people who are mistreated, it won't be long before we are among them. Because if there is one thing that we should all be painfully aware of, it's this. We are simply cogs in the wheel. Our government does not protect us. It does not work for the good of the people, and for many reasons, we've gotten way out of balance. We've forgotten that the government works for us. Without us, they are nothing. So how on earth have we allowed those who occupy that space to run so completely unchecked that we are now beholden to their inept leadership and corrupt modes of operation? I don't know if I will see it happen anytime in my lifetime, but I foresee some sort of a revolution. I can feel it rising in the kids and the young adults here in America. I don't think the time is very far away when there might be a very painful reminder that our leaders are outnumbered by us by millions. If we could just get along and stick together for a change, we might just make this world a better place. Thank you for joining me today on Dining with Death, True Crime Tuesday. Hit the like button if you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and if you really want to help, you can join my Patreon. If you want to give a couple bucks a month, that's fine with me, but it keeps the videos coming, and in the end, we have a big goal. We want to raise money to donate to police departments that have cold case DNA in storage that cannot be tested because they will not allocate money to test. The kits cost between $500 and $750 each, and there are thousands of them sitting in refrigeration waiting to be tested. Eventually, we're going to raise money and we're going to get some of those kits tested. I know it. Thanks so much for spending a little bit of your day with me. I appreciate your support more than you ever know. Stay safe, my friends, and be kind to each other. And I will see you next time on Dining with Death. Bye.